Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to reflect on the rapid progress UK-EU relations seem to have made in the past couple of months, motivated by a need on both sides to mitigate the damage which Trump threatens to cause for our economies and defence. But even before Trump, Putin threw resources behind Brexit because he saw it as a way of weakening Europe ahead of long-planned expansion for a new oligarch-based Soviet Union, and yet, when he unleashed his less than well thought through plans, he ended up forcing even the Conservative government to move close to Europe to tackle the threat. Both Putin and Trump have wanted to weaken Europe. We are certainly under massive pressure, but that pressure has just moved us close together, not further apart. Their attempts are failing and will ultimately backfire. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, reports at the moment are all very positive about the prospects of some of the tangible benefits of moving closer to the EU, which are conspicuous by their absence from moving away. Labour had gone into last year's election wanting to negotiate some very specific agreements, including on security energy, as well as reducing checks on agri-food products traded between the UK and the EU, a few other things as well. But just a few months after the election, people were getting very impatient about its progress. You know, it seems the entire country expected us to walk into Narnia once the election was over. But trade experts warned we weren't going to see quick progress because it's not a priority for the EU. They did also say that Labour did themselves no favours either over feigned reluctance over, say, the youth mobility scheme as well. But the point is that as of the start of 2025, warm words were all we basically had, with the hope that we might see more concrete progress as we built up to the 2026 trade and cooperation talks. It was all really going very slowly. Then Trump happened. First of all, switching sides from Ukraine to Russia meant that Europe suddenly had a way more serious and urgent security and defence problem. People said that this made closer moves to the EU even more urgent, and absolutely it did. But others were saying, yeah, but it's also going to make it less likely because UK trade was actually just dropping down the list of priorities for the EU. However, it did make a security agreement more of a priority, although the EU were keen on that anyway. But then Trump moved again on trade. His tariff policy is forecast to cause a significant drop in global trade, even if he never goes back to his Liberation Day levels. This is a material problem for everyone, including the EU, and especially countries that trade a lot with the United States. With no realistic prospect of negotiating anything with the US, which would put trade back to where it was, Trump is offering various flavours of worse than it was at the start of 2025. So diversifying to other markets is the only viable strategy for growth. Lots of countries will now be motivated to lower trade barriers with more reliable partners. And one of the most illogical trade barriers in the world is that which exists between Britain and the EU. All of a sudden, trade barriers become a more urgent issue for the EU. And because the UK is already passing legislation to align standards more easily with them, we are the low-hanging fruit to boost European trade. And so, as well as a beefier defence and security agreement than originally conceived, we're now hearing positive mood music on trade as well. We look like getting close to an agreement on the youth mobility deal, which, remember, it can be built upon in the years to come. The major political anxiety will be over the implementation of the deal. Once it's in place, you can later on go, oh yeah, let's just increase the cap. And from the EU perspective, we're also hearing positive reports about an agri-food deal based on alignment of standards to reduce checks. This is something which would hopefully have been agreed in time anyway, and there's still more the UK and EU can do to lower trade barriers without compromising either side's red lines, but progress now seems to have gathered a bit of momentum. And it occurs to me that both Putin and Trump have been openly attempting to weaken Europe, and yet both have ultimately failed in their efforts. They both present a huge threat to Europe still, of course. That hasn't gone away, and we actually could still get worse days to come before we're out of it. But their schemes have backfired in terms of driving a wedge between the major powers of Europe, including, and most specifically, from my point of view, Britain and Europe. At the start of 2022, Putin finalising his plans to launch the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he must have thought he'd cracked it. The British government was openly hostile towards the EU, no formal talks taking place between the two sides on any issues. Our government was headed up by Boris Johnson, seen as just as much a Russian asset as Trump had been. He was very close to Kremlin-backed figures when he was Foreign Secretary and Russia had just launched a deadly attack on British soil, and foreign secretaries and their equivalents from around the Western world were meeting together. Boris Johnson skipped his security detail to get drunk with Russian agents in Italy. Goodness knows what he said whilst pissed as a fart. And he wasn't sacked for this. Not only did the Conservatives cover it up, they later made Johnson Prime Minister, where he was then able to put another Kremlin-backed oligarch into our parliament. As for America, even under Biden, they were showing less interest in Europe as attention turned to the Pacific. But then, when the invasion came, even the Boris Johnson government swung behind Ukraine. It did not take long before it was politically acceptable in Britain for us to actually work with the EU on defence matters. We were even cheering the German arms industry powering up, something you would not expect of our xenophobic tabloids. Although Putin had succeeded in that political split between Britain and other major powers of Europe, it didn't last. He actually gave us a reason to start talking again. But of course, our trade was still suffering and the government was still very Brexity. All very well talking about defence spending as a share of GDP. But if your GDP takes a 4% hit from a Russian-inspired Brexit, then even the same share on defence spending means less actual spending for the military. Putin united the major European powers on defence issues. Small comfort to him that Hungary is suckling at his teat, because all they can do is cause a few irritations. Britain has one of the largest militaries in Europe, despite the Tories hollowing it out, and we're joining with the EU now in boosting the defence industry in the defence of European countries threatened by Russia. But Trump has also pushed us closer together on trade, attempting to do Putin's work in trying to encourage Britain to, say, adopt lower food standards in order to stymie any efforts at better trade with the EU. That's failed. Rachel Reeves, meeting with counterparts from other countries, including the United States, at the IMF, has said that the UK is in no rush to agree a trade deal with America. And indeed, why should we be? We don't know what the trading arrangements are until they settle down on their tariffs. But she's also said that our trading relationship with Europe is arguably even more important. Now, this is something that Number 10, when asked by journalists, just said, well, it's just a statement of fact, isn't it? And indeed it is. Our trade with the EU is way more, it's not just a bit more, it's way more than with the United States. But I will draw your attention to the fact that, be it a statement of fact or not, just a few months ago, the same Rachel Reeves was describing the United States as our most important trading partner. That is based on the idea of value of exports to individual countries, of course, which never makes sense because you can't arrange trade deals with individual EU countries, only the entire market. But the same British Chancellor has, across a span of just, weeks really, gone from emphasising the importance of the US market to making it clear that as important as it is, it's second fiddle to the EU. And she said it publicly, and she said that for a reason. Starmer keeps insisting, quite correctly, that we shouldn't be choosing between the US and EU. Doing so means sacrificing trade. Well, that means sacrificing productivity, jobs, tax revenues, and ultimately inviting even more unpopular policies from the Treasury. I don't understand how people opposed to cuts are in favour of reducing our trade with the US. But as I've said for a while, if Trump decides to force that choice upon us, if he says, I will only agree a trade deal with you that will make it more difficult for you to agree closer relations with the EU, well, we've decided that the EU is worth more to us. And because Trump is also threatening the EU, it's not just that he's providing extra impetus on the British side to get that deal. He's actually motivated the EU to want that deal as well. Because it was always a high priority for us, not so much for the EU. All he's actually done in attempting to drive a wedge between us is bring us together more quickly than anyone really thought possible at the start of this year. Next month, we're expecting the formal announcement of a major collaboration between the UK and the EU on defence. We're also more hopeful of some encouraging breakthroughs on trade afterwards. And then remember, the more agreements we get, the more need there is for officials to talk to one another. Because, agreement isn't the end of it. You will then have UK and EU officials having to talk to each other about how they put it into practice. And the more they talk to each other about those things, the more they'll talk to each other about other things. Cannot emphasise enough. We literally cut off all talks between the UK and EU for several years. It meant misunderstandings on both sides because it was dialogue by news reports, and journalists are not exactly the most accurate. Getting together again on defence, intelligence sharing, energy, trade, that will mean we find more opportunities to work on even closer arrangements in time as well. Putin and Trump tried to divide Europe against itself. Orban aside, they've failed. Even Maloney is not playing their game. As long as France continues to keep the Nazis out of power, then the next decade should look a lot brighter for Europe than the last one. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.